Got it. Great. Well, I am so excited to be here with everybody today. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Dave and Kevin and Jody. I think you're here somewhere. I think I saw you pop in. I just want to thank you for your compassion and foresight on making these Biz Cafes available every week for free to all of us. I think it's been great to stay connected. I always say socially connected, yet physically distanced. And so I think this has been a really great opportunity to keep seeing everyone every week. It would have been really great to see your smiling faces in person. And that was the original plan when we set up this Biz Cafe. But I'm really glad to be here with all of you virtually to lead one of my favorite conversations and topics, the topic of influence. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm getting this Zoom thing down. Everybody see the slides? Somebody just give me a thumbs up. Yes, awesome. Well, we all know those amazing communicators who know how to influence others. They speak, others listen, they understand them, and they agree. And that's the amazing part. How do they do it? And if you're like most of us mere mortals, like me, you're probably often challenged by getting folks to hear and understand your ideas and to support your perspectives or your goals that you're trying to achieve. You may struggle with this skill, and if you do, you're not alone. The ability to influence others, to support our ideas, to get others to think or feel or act differently is really a challenge that eludes most of us. It's actually eludes the best communicators, myself included. And in this fast work from home world, one of the things I realize is that influence becomes even more important. People are distracted. Meetings sometimes are coming fast and furious, one Zoom call after another. As I heard somebody say previously, they're on a number of Zoom calls every day. The ability to influence and communicate concisely and effectively, and like what I like to call elegantly, becomes even more important. Just last week, I was coaching one of my clients who's a vice president of a local manufacturing company, trying to help him think through how he was going to convince his boss, the president of the company, in a jam-packed Zoom agenda meeting that they had, that his boss would support a training program on management development at this point in time with everything that's going on. Many of my clients are trying to use this skill, learning how to use this skill, and I'm excited to be able to offer them tools and resources to support them. One of my favorite quotes is from Napoleon Hill: "The ability to influence people without irritating them is probably the most profitable skill you can learn." If we want to get results, we want to make positive change as leaders, all while strengthening relationships, then we need to use a strategic approach to influence. So let me tell you a little bit about who I am. This is my business, Pathways Consulting. I am the founder and president of Pathways Consulting, and we provide support to small and medium-sized organizations and businesses. We help them improve their bottom line by developing leaders at all levels of the organization and helping them manage some of the most tough challenges, which are people challenges, often things like engagement and retention, teamwork, conflict, performance management, and change management. Our portfolio of services, as you see on the slide, includes coaching and consulting. I do a lot of OD consulting as an OD professional, and I do a lot of training. I've been training for about the last 20 years, and I've been in HR for about the last 20 years. And I'm a certified executive coach and a certified power and influence coach. And you may think, that's a certification? Well, it was a program I went through a great program. It was about 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, that I took the program. And it really has made a difference for me and my clients. Not long ago, it was actually last year, I did a workshop similar to this one for the local HR association, and they referred to me as an influence expert. And I just laughed, because I think I have learned, it's humbling, because I have learned what I know about influence through the School of Hard Knocks, which I think most of us would probably say is a great university, right? That we learn a lot from experience, and I continue to learn every day. In my past roles, boy, do I wish I had known some of these things then. I may have pushed too hard because of a well-intentioned passion for an idea that I had, something I thought that was the right thing to do. And in the process, I might have alienated some folks along the way. Interestingly, I happened to go through my power and influence coaching program about midway through my tenure as an elected official here locally in Washoe County. And I have to say that the second half of my term was a lot more successful than the first, because I decided to practice some of the techniques that I'm going to share with you today. It helped me build relationships by taking the time to listen and find what was important to the other person, which led us to find more collaborative results. I always say, I teach what I need to remember, and influence is one of those things I need to remember. So I'm really excited to be here to have this opportunity to speak with you about it today, and for us to dialogue about it together. Here's our agenda for what we're going to be talking about. One of the ways I like to talk about influence is that it's a science and an art. It's a science because certain principles apply in almost every influence situation. Certain strategies prove to be useful time and time again. And certain behaviors work better than others when you're trying to influence someone. It's also an art because it draws upon the need to read other people, to think creatively, to respond spontaneously, to use emotional intelligence. All of those things are more the art side of influence. This workshop is going to introduce you to a simple, powerful approach that'll help you hone that scientific side of influence. And we're going to touch along the way about some of those art side of influence, including communication, negotiation, all of which are going to help you be better influencers. So after a brief dialogue about the what and the why of influence, and you're going to help me along with that, we're going to review 8 guiding principles of influence that drive successful influence that you can use with upper management, with customers, with your team, with investors, and even in interactions in your personal life. And I'm actually going to share a couple of stories along the way about that because it really does prove to be pretty helpful with your teenage kids and in fact your spouse. So some of these techniques can also help you there. And then we're going to talk about the 5-step process. And it's a helpful process and a strategic approach that can help you get to the goal that you're trying to achieve. It's very flexible and you don't have to use all the 5 steps. I have a lot of steps to a lot of different tools that I have. And I always say, use the ones that are most important. And I'm going to hit and highlight what the ones I think are the most important and probably the most critical to success in an influence conversation. One of those steps is particularly important, and I wrote my recent article for NCET's piece in the RGJ about this very topic, choosing the best influence strategy. What's best for the situation that you're in and with the person that you're trying to influence. I encourage you, and I thank Carol for saying she's going to take notes. I encourage you to have to take notes and have a pen and paper handy, because I'm actually going to ask you to think along the way about how you might use certain ones of these techniques that we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to stop along the way and see if there are questions. I'll keep my eye on the chat box too. I may stop and see. We're not that large of a crowd, so I'll probably allow you to just kind of throw them out, but we'll see how that goes. And so let's jump in. So influence, what does it mean? Well, we all have definitions of it. In fact, I'm going to have you here in a minute be thinking about what you'd add to the ones I'm going to share with you. The capacity or power of a person to be a compelling force on or produce the effects on the actions, behaviors, or opinions of others. It's that ability to move people or a person or persons, maybe it's a group of people, to the desired action, to do, to think, to feel or differently, usually within the context of a goal that you have, and hopefully a goal that you can find alignment with the goal for the other person. And here's another definition that I really like. The power to cause changes without directly forcing them to happen. Now, this last definition reminds us that sometimes we can be much more influential if people are not aware that we're trying to influence them. It encourages us to be smart and subtle at the same time. And another favorite quote of mine I'm going to share with you, a few along the way here. Salvador Dali once said, "The secret to my influence is that it's always been a secret. It's always remained a secret." So it's basically, people didn't know that he was doing it, is his point. So I'm going to ask you to throw in the chat box what other ways that you could define influence. So chat in the box any other words or phrases that come to mind when you think of the word influence. Now, those of you who know me as a trainer know I will not settle for non-participation. So chat away. How do you differentiate between influence and manipulation? We're going to talk about that later. And if I forget to bring that up, Milena, please remind me, but I do want to talk about that. Effective management, magnetic personality, somebody who influences. Great. Well, actually, Milena, let me take that question. And answer it a little bit. I think, well, actually, I'll ask others to chime in the chat box, the difference between influence and manipulation. As we're going to talk about, part of what you want to do in influence, and Stephen Covey talks a lot about this in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Influence. as did Bob Berg in his book, From Adversaries from Adversaries to Supporters. Both about, his book is about influence as well. He says we really have to look at what our intent is. If our intent is to deceive or harm the other person, or we're going at this conversation solely for our own interest and we're trying to either cajole in a negative way or browbeat somebody into doing what we want to do and it might harm them. Hopefully you can find a win-win and there's something in it for the other person. And by approaching it thinking about the other person, you're going to keep yourself from engaging in behaviors that might feel to the other person as manipulative. And we all know what's like to be on the other side of that. So when we talk about influence, it's really about persuasion. That's another word that we can use, or convincing. But again, we're tapping into what's in it for the other person as well. And a goal, of course, is not to harm them. And if it is something we have to check our intent about, then it's good to step back and ask ourselves. So those are some of my thoughts on that. It always comes up in every class that I teach, every workshop I give, that relationship between influence and manipulation and how they're similar and how they're different. I hope that gets a little bit at your question. Great. So let's talk a little bit about, and here's a few more comments, being open to ideas and communicating transparently. That's great, about a great way to influence without manipulating, and providing valuable information and insight. Good, thanks for those comments. Well, let's talk a little bit about why it matters. Why is it important? Why does the ability to successfully influence others really matter to us as business professionals? Well, I can throw up a few different benefits, and here's 10, and I'm sure, and I'm going to ask you in a moment to think about what it would bring to your life to be able to influence more effectively. But we can enjoy the feeling of achieving our goals more effectively without as much resistance and with greater support. We can elevate our leadership presence. In fact, some of my mid-level management clients are really working on the skill of influence because they want to advance and they want to demonstrate their impact in the organization. You can lead high-performance teams more effectively, get more from your talented team members. You can lead project team members more effectively by asking them to do things, influencing them to go in a certain direction, and changing the direction of a project to be able to achieve results. You can strengthen relationships and deepen your engagement with a variety of teams, diverse members of your team, with stakeholders and clients, and help you deliver mission-critical results. You can implement change more effectively. It's great for change management. You need to influence people to get on board with a new direction. And I know a lot of organizations are pivoting right now, and there's a lot of change going on. So there's a lot of influencing that they need to do with their teams. You can develop and retain your top talent. I'm going to use an example as we go through the 5 steps of a situation where you might need to influence an employee to change their behavior. So how can you develop your talent? How can you retain them? Because a lot of what we're doing when we develop our employees, we're using influence to help them grow, to help them take on more, to help them change their behavior. You might be influencing someone around funding or resources that you need to support an initiative that you have. You also can be influential with outsiders in your organization, from your organization, to help your organization's reputation and the outcomes you try to achieve. So stakeholders outside of your company or your business, investors potentially. And then you can accelerate your career trajectory. As I mentioned before, you can, when you show your influence and your ability to have impact and greater impact, you do really help your own career and your ability to advance. So the question I want you to think about is, why does having more influence matter to you? What significant and positive differences in your professional or personal life might be possible if you could influence more effectively? Go ahead and, there's somebody wrote, we have the opportunity to change the world for the better. I like that, Jackie. What other positive legacy could you leave if you were able to have greater impact? What difference would it make in your life, your professional or personal life, if you could use influence more effectively? Go ahead and throw a few more into the chat box. What difference would it make for you? Empowers others to do the imaginable. And sometimes we help, part of what we're doing when we delegate to an employee or a team member, we're encouraging them to move forward. Maybe we're going to help them to do something that they don't even think that they can do, to be taken more seriously, leave a positive legacy. As a younger professional, that taking more seriously can be really important. I could impact others to lead a better life. I could help my business grow more profitably. I could lead people into a new direction, strengthen your credibility. I'll look at a few more here. I'm sure more are going to come in. Create a committee to help me identify a few things. And sometimes you have to convince people or influence people to join your committees, and that's not always easy when people are really busy. And get different perspectives and give different perspectives to others. Really what we're talking about when we talk about influence is the desire to have greater impact. See, I've got a little stall going on here in my computer. There we go. My favorite slide, impact, the power of influence. It's really helpful when we think about influence is the ability to impact others. And another great quote that I love, the power of persuasion would be the greatest superpower of all time. Wouldn't it be amazing to have that superpower, to do all of those things that you just described, to achieve all of those things that you just described? So this is our first opportunity to launch a poll. I'm going to launch a poll and I'm going to ask everybody to participate. It asks you, where do you find yourself most challenged to influence others? There's different ways that we intersect with so many people in our lives. You could probably pick more than one of these, but if you were to pick your top one, which one would it be? So go ahead, I'll leave it open here for about 30 seconds to see what kind of responses that we get. I'm watching them all come in. I'm going to leave it open for about 10 more seconds. We got some good responses here. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and let's see the results. Well, there's a lot of distribution here in our group. We've got a significant, the highest percentage here, 31%, want to influence potential clients. The second highest here is with your boss. How do you influence up? How do you coach up, as I always like to say? How do you get them to support you in what you want to work on? And then pretty close behind that is at home. Those of you who have kids, or you need to get something from your spouse or your significant other. So good. So we have a little bit of a distribution there. Be thinking about those opportunities that you might have in your life where influence could come in handy. So you've identified some areas where it could be useful. It's also really helpful to reflect on how strong our influence muscle is. So I always like to ask this question, how strong are our muscles on some important leadership skills? It's so critical to reflect on this question in order to grow as leaders. Starting with an honest recognition of how strong we are in something or how we might need to work on something is a great way to identify how we want to improve. And so there's some ways I like to look at this. Sometimes you might find yourself regularly stuck in similar situations or situations where you hear yourself saying to yourself certain things. So maybe you're frustrated because you didn't get the outcome you wanted at the end of the meeting. It didn't go in the direction you thought your team should go. Or maybe it's when you're concerned about the performance or behavior of another colleague or a direct report and how it may be impacting the work and the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Maybe you're concerned about how things are right now, but you don't see a way forward or a way to take action to change it. Maybe you've announced a change and people don't seem to be on board, or you find yourself saying, gosh, my people just don't do what I want them to do. Why is that? Maybe you're unable to land new business, or maybe you've gotten some feedback that you push too hard with others and you may have hurt some relationships. Or on the flip side, maybe folks have told you that you're avoiding appropriate conflict when you need to be asserting yourself more. All of these are signs that your influence muscle could use some working out. So I'd like to launch the second poll and ask you to think about how strong is your influence muscle. Let me see if I can get that second poll to pop up. Here it comes. So there's some fun answers here. So see what you think. How would you rate yourself in terms of your influence skill level? What do you think? Go ahead and answer. I'll leave it open for about 30 seconds. About 5 more seconds. Okay. I'm going to end the poll and let's look at the results. Oh, it's a pretty close race there, right in the middle. Hey, and we have 2 influence rock stars. I want to know who you are because maybe you should be teaching this with me and I want you on my team. But let's look at these. There's a pretty good and fair here. So we don't have a whole lot of people who are terribly challenged, and we don't have any number 5. So that's great. But I know sometimes people feel that way when they speak up in meetings and they wonder, wait, somebody just said the same thing 10 minutes after I did, and everybody seemed to support their idea. So what happened? Why, when I shared it, did it not get traction? So it's really helpful to look at and think about where we have room to improve. And most of you seem to be in the middle, and obviously opportunities for growth. And again, I want to know who those 2 people are who were the rock stars, the influence rock stars. Well, today we're going to pump that muscle just a little bit and make it just a little bit stronger, because as Ken Blanchard says, the key to successful leadership today is influence, not authority. We need to be able to influence others and maybe do it when they don't even know you're influencing them. Understanding the principles of influence and using a structured approach can help us get unstuck in some of these areas where we might be stuck and achieve greater success in some of our toughest conversations. And before we dive into those, I would like you to take a moment and think about your current situation. I'd love you to see if you can make this, what you're learning today, actionable immediately. Chances are most of us have situations where we have to influence somebody. You've got a conversation you need to have, or you anticipate having. It could be a boss, could be your team member, could be a project team colleague, it could be in your personal life. So ask yourself, what is a current situation that you, in your professional role or your personal life, need to influence someone or maybe even a group of people? Again, it could be on a project, you could be asking for a budget request, any number of things. See if you can think of a situation and keep it in mind as we move forward. So I'm going to let you take a moment, jot a thought down so you can pick one, and then we can see if along the way you can apply some of these principles. Okay. Well, let's dive in to the principles of influence. These are guiding principles that are going to provide a helpful frame of reference for the 5-step process we're going to learn about later today. So first and foremost, and there's a reason that this one is number 1, the key to influencing another person is to connect what you want with what they need or want. People do things for their reasons, not yours. So you've got to connect to what matters to them, what is a concern to them, what business issue is burning for them. What are their priorities? Is it increasing market share, or the timeliness of a new product launch, or improving customer retention, reducing legal costs, of managing employee grievances? Is it employee turnover? What is important to the person that you're speaking with, and how can you connect what you're suggesting or asking for to that? Most people forget this principle. We have worked with people who probably say, hey, I want you to do this because it matters to me. There's a story about an entrepreneur who takes her number 2 to a huge, gorgeous field and says, Jim, if you keep working your butt off for me and my company for another 4 to 5 years, everything you see here, all of the mountains, the land, the streams, it's all going to be mine. It's a great example of somebody who doesn't really understand influence and doesn't realize that you're not going to move people to do things unless you connect what's important to them. So if you're trying to influence your CEO or your CFO or anybody else in the C-suite, you got to put yourself in their shoes, reflect on what are they facing and the challenges that they're facing. I always say, remember my favorite radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? That's how most of us think and operate. We want to know that. So help people see that when you talk with them about the ideas you have. Bring it to them from their perspective and consider what motivates them. Connect what you want to what they want or need. If you don't know before you go into that conversation what might be important to them, maybe it's time to do a little research before you take that chance to have that conversation. And you may only have one go at it. So prepare yourself and find out more about what the other person might need and how they define success. Yeah, so Manuel likes that radio station. It's a good one to remember. So principle 2, it's another good one. Approach influence strategically. It's kind of connected to number 1, but what you want to think about is how does the idea that you're proposing or promoting, how does it connect to the needs of the organization? How is it important to the strategic needs of the organization? I've been in many times in my HR career, I've had an idea, I want to do this training program because it's neat and it's cool. But I think if I want to make this case, I can't just say it's really nice and cool. I have to look at it and say, how does it help my organization? How does it meet some goal we have right now, some strategic goal? I've got to think beyond what's interesting and important to me, what's important for the organization. And this reflection is important because it can allow you to think about all the different places in your organization your idea or your suggestion might impact. And that helps because later on you're going to want to be thinking, who is it that I really need to influence here? Are there other stakeholders that could be affected by the suggestion I'm making? And maybe I need to get them on board. So it allows you to start thinking about the sphere of influence of this particular idea. Number 3, if you don't ask for what you want directly, you probably won't get it. No one can read your mind, or few people can read between the lines. And as awkward as it might be for some of us, we have to put it out there and assert what it is we specifically want. Now, what that really requires, as we'll talk about in step 1 of the process, we need to know what our end goal is in the conversation. And some people aren't clear about that, and they go into a conversation and they seem to move around from focus to focus, and they feel a little bit like a bull in a china shop. So you've got to start with a clear perspective of where you want to be at the end of the conversation and what you need from them. So if you say you want their support, what does that really mean? Is that $10,000 in additional budget money? Or is it that they attend a project team? What specifically is it that you want from that other person? And that way you can assert that clearly and be able to evaluate if you actually achieve that by the end of the conversation. So know before you go and be ready to ask for it. And part of what we often have to ask ourselves, particularly if we might not be as comfortable asserting, is what's keeping me from being assertive or explicit in asking for what I want? Principle 4, influence happens one person at a time. Now, we might wish that we can just present something to our entire board and convince them this is a good idea, but chances are every single person in that room are going to have different needs and interests. So influence happens one person at a time means that we have to think about a stakeholder campaign. And I actually have a tool I use with my clients who have an influence campaign that involves multiple stakeholders. You need to identify, who do you need on your side? Who do you need maybe just step out of the way? Who do you need totally on board and championing this with you? And what do you need from them? So you have to consider, what are the benefits or issues that could come up from your different stakeholders, especially after you thought about the question of how does it impact the organization strategically. It becomes easier to do that analysis. We're halfway through these principles. Take 100% responsibility for the impact you have on others. Just because you intended to get your point across doesn't necessarily mean you're going to succeed or that you've succeeded. An effective leader is going to want to reflect on the learning opportunity and adjust their approach and style if they're not successful. If somebody else pushes back hard or gets annoyed, learn from that and adjust your approach. So take responsibility for that. Sometimes we may get frustrated and say, oh, they just don't get it. But a good leader will stop, look inward and say, how might I adjust and respond to their concerns? So if you're not getting your way, chances are it has to do with your approach, or maybe that your goals aren't aligned with what the other person needs. So that is principle number 5, a really important one. To be successful at influence, we have to balance our drive for results with the importance of building relationships. And we probably have a third thing to balance in there, and that's a little bit of our ego. And what's interesting is that in every organization, in every organizational culture, the degree to which you can assert and push for results may be different than in other organizations. And for different people, it may look different. So it's important to be self-aware and self-aware of the situation that you find yourself in. Some people push so hard for the results because they think it's a great idea, like I described myself in the past before, and I still do it from time to time, but we can come across as obnoxious or pushy or dictatorial or overly demanding, and we can damage relationships. Another great quote I love is, you cannot agonize and influence at the same time. So if you're agonizing because you're pushing too hard for results, maybe anybody can get results with a sledgehammer, but you might burn bridges and relationships. And if your ego gets in the way and you're trying to get too much of the credit, that could also really make it less successful. So you want to find that happy medium. And the other thing that we sometimes do for others of us, we may overemphasize relationships. We tiptoe so softly when influencing others that the other person pushes back, and we don't ask more questions or continue to advocate or find ways to address their concerns. So in the effort to preserve relationships, we might sacrifice results. So again, what we need to do here is find that happy balance. And we each should look at ourselves and say, am I one that drives toward results pretty quickly? Or do I overemphasize relationships? Where am I most comfortable? Where am I least comfortable? Again, great leadership opportunity to reflect. Where do you tend to go? And ask yourself, what are the potential consequences of pushing too hard? What are the potential consequences of not being more direct or advocating for what I need? Principle number 7. This is the one we're going to spend a little bit of time on when we got through the 5 steps. You've got to adapt your style and practice influence flexibility. We need to adapt our approach to the situation and to the other person. It really depends on the outcome that you want. Is it understanding? Is it commitment? Is it compliance? Is it, I want that person to champion my cause? What is it that we want from the other person? And that might influence or impact how we approach, and should impact how we approach the other person. We also want to think about who the other person is. Are they a head person? Just the facts kind of person? Are they a gut person who prefers directness, cut to the chase? You might be more effective if you do. Or are they a heart person who's going to want to be a part of it, going to want to have input, going to want to be asked questions? Are they a big picture person who's going to know, how is this going to change our organization or impact our team or the people in our team? Are they going to need to be moved to be able to support your idea? So you ask yourself, how are they more likely to be moved? And considering these questions might help you develop the best appeal strategy. And like I said, we're going to spend a bit of time on some of the different ones here in just a moment. Last but not least, there are no guarantees. A good leader and a good influencer realizes that sometimes, no matter what you say or how compelling your case may be, you might not be able to achieve your goals. And there may be times that the other person may renege on what they say that they were going to do and the agreement that they made with you. In every influence situation, keep in mind that there's some things you can control and some things you can't. The most effective influencers don't take that rejection personally. No's are hard, but don't take it personally. Realize that there are no guarantees. You can brush yourself up, learn from it, try again. As in any situation, it could be a really important learning opportunity. As I always hear from in my work as in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, there is no failure, only feedback. And so when it doesn't work out well, take that step back and ask yourself, what did I learn from this? How can I do things differently in the future? Do I want to try again with the situation, or do I want to just bring that learning to the next thing, the next influence conversation that I have? So you can see in these guiding principles that it really requires, to be an effective influencer, that we draw upon a number of skills: communication, emotional intelligence, understanding how people are different, so that personality differences and preferences, problem solving, maybe being able to present information in a reasoned, logical way, maybe even data analysis, strategic thinking, and continuous improvement. There is so much that we draw upon to be good influencers. And hopefully these principles set up a good framework for you to as we move forward into the 5 steps. So I want to pause here and see if you have any questions. I know we have quite a few people here. So if you have a question, take this opportunity to jot it down in the chat box right here for right now, and see if anybody has any questions about any of these 8 guiding principles. Well, I'm not seeing any questions at this point. So now we're going to move and spend the rest of our time together looking at the 5-step process. It's a very structured 5-step process. It's a strategic approach that helps you better prepare for and achieve greater success in some of the toughest influence conversations that we might have. As I mentioned before, the beauty of this process is you don't have to do it all, but there are some that are really important to do and that will definitely help your influence be more effective. So let's take it step by step. First and foremost, begin with the end in mind. Again, using Stephen Covey's language, Start with a very clear goal. In order to be successful, you need to know what you want to have when you leave the conversation. Without a goal, you don't know where you're going. And if after the conversation, you won't be able to, you might wonder, did I get what I wanted? I'm not sure. So this is one that many people forget. And we set goals a lot, and SMART goals a lot in many different places in our lives. But with many of these conversations, it's important to get clear on what it is we want and to set a SMART goal. Sometimes we don't set a goal at all, or it's way too fuzzy. Most of us know what a goal is. But I want to reiterate the importance of making it SMART, or at least SMAT, because chances are it's already relevant to what you're going to be focusing on. So a good goal clearly states what the other person will do differently, think differently, feel differently by the end of the conversation or soon thereafter as a result of the conversation. And it has a deadline. You're asking somebody to do something by a certain time. So for example, if I were to say, Tim, I want you to support my project. What does that really mean? Well, I don't know what that really means. I could walk away and I'm not sure exactly how Tim has agreed to support my project. So I could say instead, Tim, I'd like you to attend our weekly project team meetings and dedicate 2 hours a week to this project. I'd also like you to assign another member of your team to this project. Given where we are right now in our project, I think it's important that we have this start by July 1st. And those are smarter goals. And I can work with Tim to find out whether or not we can make that work, or maybe I'm willing to adjust some of those parameters. Another example, Christina, I'd like you to be more engaged at work and have a better attitude. So I'm a supervisor talking to my employee and I say that. Well, what does that really mean? It's pretty fuzzy. What are the specific behaviors that I want to see from Christina? And how will I know that she's actually behaving that way? Maybe I want her to arrive at work on time, leave no earlier than 6 o'clock, complete all assignments with no errors and on time, or something else. So I want to be as specific as possible so that I can then know I've actually achieved that and that they've actually done it after the conversation. So getting that clear goal in mind really helps you as you move forward. And of all the steps, it's probably one of the two that I think is probably most important to really clarify what you want to achieve. Now, here is where there's a lot of questions that you can ask. You want to assess the situation and the other person. And you begin to look at the different ways you might be able to influence and, connect with what the other person might need or want. Again, you're thinking about that first principle. What is it about the other person? What do they need? What are their concerns are? How can I, for lack of a better term, hook them? Not manipulate, but how can I find the win-win? So here are some questions, and I do have a form I walk through with my clients, and these are just a few of the example questions that we ask to help them really evaluate what's going on in the situation and what the other person's needs might be. How might the other person react to your suggestion or what you're asking for? What reasons might matter to them? What might they agree with or disagree with? And what can you control? What can you take away? What can you offer them in exchange for what you're asking for them? What do you share in common? What's your bottom line, or where are you flexible? Is there wiggle room anywhere? Or are you pretty set? This is really, there's not wiggle room on one piece of it, but maybe there is on another piece of it. And what specifically do you want from them in the situation? Which leads you to the next step about how you want to approach it based on what you want from them. So you've got to think about them first, and you have to think about what it is that you need from them. And again, evaluate what this situation presents before you dive into thinking about the best approach to use. So that's step 2. Step 3, and we're going to spend some time with this one, choosing your best appeal strategy. When you develop your strategy, you've got to think about who is this person that I'm talking to? What do I know about them? As well as what is it that I need from them? And this appeal framework that we're looking at links to certain parts of the body. The head, which we split into 2 when we think about a certain approach. We've got the heart, we've got the gut, and we've got the spirit and vision. So those are different ways that we can approach influence. Now, I'll say up front that we have a preference. Each of us has one based on who we are. And often it's the way that other people can use to influence us. Learning to use something different than what we're most comfortable with or familiar with is very critical to influence success. Because if we use the same approach in every situation, it's like trying to fix a car with one tool. And that's never going to work for us. Sometimes we have to use different approaches to get what we need. So let's talk about these one by one. And I'm going to give you some examples as we walk through them. The left brain, like we all know, it's the seat of facts, logic, reason, analysis, data. If you're an authority on a topic, this is great to bring some information that you have that might impress or influence the other person. It's also really important to ask yourself, is this other person really wedded to facts and figures? I have to admit, I'm a heart person. I go for, and a vision person. I go for the big picture and how it can change the outcomes for employees. And when I talk about HR issues, sometimes or organizational development changes. And if I'm talking to the CFO, chances are he's going to want to know, or she's going to want to know, the ROI, the facts and figures about how much something costs. So if I go in with my high vision focus, big picture talking, it's going to go like right over them, and they're going to like, no, too expensive, not the right time. So I have to think carefully about what it is I need to present to that person. So it's a really concrete approach. Here's what I suggest, and here are 3 reasons why. Keep your facts and figures, if you're using this approach, limited to no more than 3, because most of our brains can't process too much more than 3, even though I'm giving you a 5-step process today, but I think 3 is a great number. And what you're going for here as your desired outcome is that you've convinced them intellectually that the idea makes sense, that they agree with it, that they understand it. Now, let me give you a couple examples. We're going to use these throughout these different influence strategies. I'll start with a personal one first. With my husband, we're going out to lunch. We go out to lunch every Friday. And I'd like to go to this new Chinese restaurant. So now if I start out with, Patrick, I really want to try this new Chinese restaurant because I love Chinese food. Well, that's all about me, right? So maybe I need to think about shifting my focus to him. You know, honey, I know you want to cut back on calories. This place has 20 low-calorie options. That's one example. Or maybe he's been worrying about getting back to work late after our lunches. So I say, you know, they guarantee serving time of 15 minutes. I point to facts that I know matter to him when I'm trying to convince him to go with me to this Chinese restaurant. Let's use a work situation. A team member, let's call him Joe. He's been coming late to our project team meetings. And so I can say something along the lines of, you know, Joe, for the last 3 weeks, you've been coming late to this meeting and it looks bad to this director. I know you want to move up in the company, and it's unlikely you'll be considered for promotion if you've been showing up late and unable to show up on time. I know you also wanted to stay on this as project lead for the next project. So this will bolster your chances if you show commitment to the team. Again, I focus on what's important to Joe. I look for a couple of facts. I don't overwhelm with a whole bunch of facts, but I focus in on the ones that matter most to the other person. Now, one thing about the left brain, it's probably the most commonly used, and some people say overused. And there are limits to our ability to appeal to people with just logic and facts. So we want to think about ways that we can spice it up a bit. And this is where the right brain comes in. It's not a standalone approach per se, but it's kind of like the spice you throw in to add a little bit more to other approaches. It actually works really well with the vision and spirit approaches, but you can also use it with the left brain. It's where you bring in an inspiring story or a metaphor or an example to paint a picture, because studies show that you can reach people more when you appeal to another part of their brain, to that part of their brain, so they can visualize something. So let's just take the lunch example with my husband. You know, our friend Cameron took her daughter Chloe to this restaurant last week, and when Chloe opened her fortune cookie, it said, "You will be receiving great news that will change your future." And literally the next day, her acceptance letter from UC Berkeley arrived. Isn't that cool? You know, so I tell a story that kind of makes that restaurant have a little more appeal to it. Or with Joe, maybe I share a story from my past and I say, you know, uh, I've done this before. I remember in my own day, I used to come late to meetings because I try to get so much done right before they started. And it really had a negative impact on my ability to move up as quickly as I wanted to. Maybe you're doing the same thing here. It's like telling a story that they can relate to. It adds color, it adds resonance. Again, we can be so analytical. We might not reach people the same way that we could if we used metaphors or connect to a movie that we've seen or a scene from a movie, or paint some other picture that the person can connect to more easily. So here's the second of the approaches. Remember, right brain is kind of a spice, but the gut. This is not about intuition or even about hitting hard. It's really about operating from a place of strength, from the center of balance. The term hara in Japanese is really about coming from a place of strength. This is where you're negotiating. You're putting out incentives and you're using the word I a little bit more. If I do this for you, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. Or here's what I need and expect from you. So for example, Chinese restaurant with my husband. Honey, if you let me choose this time, I'll let you choose the next 4 times we go to lunch. I'm making an offer. I'm saying, here's what I'll give you. Don't get into too much logic or too many facts. I just put it out there that way. And maybe I can simply assert to Joe and say, you know, if I don't like that you're coming late, I appreciate your skill on our team and I really need it. Now, again, you don't have to be rude when you use this. You can start with something positive, but you can then say, I want you to come on time. And if you do, I can promise you that we'll get the meeting done on time and you can leave on time and get to the other work that you have. But if you don't, and again, part of assertion might be what they won't get or what will happen if they don't do it. Again, use this carefully, use this sparingly, but there are some people who respond well to this. So I could say to Joe, if you don't get here on time, I'm going to insist that you stay late to catch up on what you missed. That could make you lose more time, or you won't be project lead in the next project. I get a little bit more direct. So the language changes from what we heard in the left brain, facts, neutral facts that matter to the other person. The word is I, and here's what I want and expect from you. A huge feeling shift here. Here's where we want to appeal to the other person. We use the heart. We want commitment, not just agreement or compliance. Here we are open, more about asking questions, maybe even being more vulnerable. I need your help. What do you think? I'm not sure what to do here. You've got this expertise that I really value. Help me do this, help me work this through. You're appealing to their aspirations and goals and asking what's important to them. So with my husband and lunch, I could say, I love our Friday lunches. I have a request. I'm a little concerned you'll object because I know you've gotten really attached to our usual lunch spot that we've been going to lately. I would really like to go to this Chinese place. What would it take you to get to go? Maybe he'll tell me, well, I need to go later at 2 o'clock that day. And that's the only objection he has. And so I can say, yeah, that works for me. No problem. Or if he says, I really don't like Chinese, I can say, well, here are 10 other things on the menu that are not Chinese, because I think a lot of restaurants these days pull in other items for family members or friends who might not like the food of a particular restaurant. So that's my Chinese restaurant example. How about Joe? How can I approach Joe using the heart? Joe, what am I doing wrong? You never seem to come to the meetings on time. What do I need to do to get you there? And Joe says, well, I hesitate to say this, but they drag on and they're kind of boring. And I can respond, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. What do I need to do differently? And maybe we can work out some sort of a solution. Maybe I can even let Joe help draft the agendas, or maybe be the timekeeper in the meeting to help keep us on track. And then at the end, I say, so if we do these things, will you commit to coming on time? And that, again, if you're dealing with a performance issue, you might say that may be too soft, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. If you get to the commitment that you want from him at the end of it, then that's the approach that worked best. And remember, this is different than the left brain or the gut because you're inviting in the other person. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be wishy-washy. If they put out an objection, you might say, I don't think we can do that. But what are some other ideas of things that we could do? One key caveat here is don't go in with a hard approach if there's really only one way to do something. If you're not flexible, it feels disingenuous and inauthentic. So if you're open, if you have your goal in mind, you're firm on the goal, but you're not as firm on the way to get there, then the hard approach is a good way to go. But if you're firm on the how as well, the heart could create some issues for you because you could hear some answers that you're not necessarily even open to. The last two really go together, and I'll kind of talk about them together, the spirit and the vision. You tap into something that you have in common with the other person, and you can use it to build a bond with them. Sharing values that you're both committed to, sustainability, for example. So those kinds of values, or shared experiences. We've been through this together. We've overcome similar challenges in the past. We both value teamwork, and it's really important to the two of us. We've been on this team a long time. Again, when you reach for someone's soul or spirit, it's really the word you hear here is we. With the left brain, it was it or you, facts. Gut, it was I, what I'm offering. The heart, it's you, what do you need? And in spirit and vision, it's about the we. So with us, with the vision, this is where we actually ask them to help us build a compelling future together. You're sharing the vision with them and asking, what can we do together? What can we achieve together? It's a great way to encourage enthusiasm, to develop shared purpose, figuring out, it's not great for figuring out the next steps of a contractual agreement, but it's better for collaboration where everyone's participating together. And you're asking them not just to agree, but to be champions along with you of the idea that you're putting forth. So the word we becomes really visible here. Let me use the Joe example. Joe, we've been on this team a long time. We've overcome a lot of hurdles. We're so close to finishing this, and I know we both want it to be an amazing experience for our careers and for our company. Imagine if we just keep at it, put the elbow grease in, come to the meetings on time, and do the work we need. In 2 months, we're going to be legends in this country and have opened up entirely new markets. I know I'm going over the top here, but that's kind of, I'm giving you an example here. If Joe is getting tired and burnt out, maybe this approach will help revive and restore his energy. It's also great to use when you're launching a team or trying to get a team charged up again in the face of a challenge, or you're noticing that the team is kind of floundering or struggling. Let me try it with my Chinese restaurant just for fun. Patrick, we've had this tradition for the last 2 years every Friday, and we've never gone to Chinese. 2 hours from now, after going to this new restaurant, we'll have a great time together, created a great new memory and an entirely new experience. Now, as an aside, I actually have to tell you that when I was going through my program, I tried out some approaches on my husband on certain things like getting him to clean the garage. And there was one moment that he just turned to me and he said, "Are you doing one of those training things on me?" in the middle of it. It's really funny when you start practicing these different approaches with people who are close to you and know your traditional approach. They may notice that something is a little different. So that's just a funny aside that I have to share with you, because it was a pretty humorous experience, because I tried one of those big picture vision approaches to get him to clean the garage, and it made him laugh. It made both of us laugh. So those are the strategies. Again, what we want to do is think about, and here they all are, I'm going to pull them up at the same time. Use the left brain to get to intellectual understanding. What 2 or 3 reasons can you give? Use the gut to get to compliance by giving feedback or negotiating an agreement. What can you offer if you're going to use that approach? What could you do for them or give them in exchange for what you want them to do, or even take away if you had to? Use the heart to get commitment. What could you share with them? What questions could you ask them? How could you involve them? And use a combination of vision and spirit to get people inspired, enthused, and again, to create a feeling to support and champion your idea. Find things you have in common, find out what's possible. Consider, again, adding some spice from the right brain. So be thinking about for yourself, which of these approaches do you use the most? And I encourage you to challenge yourself, and again, in the appropriate situation with the appropriate person, to try out some influence flexibility. See what you can come up with by using the toolkit of influence approaches. Select the right approach for each situation, and you'll have greater success. So I do want to mention one other thing, talking about parts of the body, and I had to find a way to get a giraffe into the presentation because I love them. But another body part that helps us remember something important about influence conversations, 2 things. The knees, we want to be flexible. Sometimes in the middle of the conversation, we've got to adapt and change and shift. So you might start with one approach and realize that's not working. Your feet might be necessary because you might get some information from the other person that you didn't know about, and the conversation didn't go quite as you planned. So you realize, maybe I need to step away. Doesn't necessarily mean you run away and never come back, but maybe you go back and you rethink your approach, or you get some more about that information that they shared, learn a little bit more. Don't give up necessarily, but be flexible with you think about being flexible and think about stepping away if you need to. So that's step 3. Somebody made a comment here. Okay. Sometimes I didn't see that sooner. It's probably earlier. Sometimes we need to encourage people softly and show empathy and caring, and good qualities to have as a business professional. For some situations, absolutely. And right now, I think a lot of people are using heart and vision because people are needing to connect, to be recharged and re-engaged, and they are afraid of the changes that are happening. So asking questions involving people is proving to be pretty important. Quickly, I want to just highlight steps 4 and 5. Step 4 is really about once you've figured out your approach, you get down to the specifics. And often with my clients, I help them with their goal. Then I move quickly to thinking about how do they want to actually structure the meeting. And this is really a little bit about scripting, because one of my favorite quotes is preparing to fail is failing to prepare, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. But I actually like to say it a little bit differently. So you want to think about your opening, how you're going to start. Remember, people get impacted pretty quickly. In the first 10 seconds, you're going to have them or you're not. And remember, work from home, you're doing this on Zoom, lots of distractions. How do you start well? How do you start clearly? What 2 or 3 points are you going to make? Or what story are you going to share to try to reach their right brain? What objections do you think they're going to raise? How will you respond to those? And what questions will you ask to further understand their resistance or their concern? What could go wrong? What should you not say, which is almost as important as what you should say? And think about some of the practical things around where and how you want to meet. And most of the meetings are going to be on Zoom, and I'll talk about some key reminders about Zoom conversations here in a moment. Sometimes the most important thing for us to remember to do as we prepare is not just what we're going to say, but what we're going to ask, to remind us to listen. And these are 2 great quotes that I really love that remind us of that. How much you can influence someone is completely dependent on how precise and complete the information is that you get from them. Sometimes in that conversation, finding out more about what is important to them is going to help you be able to influence them. And then Stephen Covey's quote, "The real beginning of influence comes that others sense that you are being influenced by them when they feel understood by you." So again, they think they're influencing you to end up with a win-win solution or next steps. How can you turn their concerns around and make it into their ideas? There's actually another quote that I'll share with you. The secret is to always let the other person have your way. So how do you help them, lead them to realize it's a win-win for them, and they may even think it was their idea? The last step is a quick one I'll just hit on, is practice. I do this a lot in my coaching sessions. We talk about the goal, we review step 4 and some of the questions about how they want to open it, and they practice. Role play it with someone. Hear yourself saying those opening sentences. And then ask yourself afterwards, how did that feel? How did that sound? What could I do differently? Try again and move forward. It's a great opportunity to try out different strategies, to see how they come out from your mouth, whether they feel right to you, and to practice saying some things that will be helpful in that session. And remember, here's the way I like to say it, rather than Benjamin Franklin's way: proper preparation propels powerful performance. One of my favorite alliterations. So prepare, prepare, prepare. Now, influencing virtually, just some key points when you're having these conversations in the work from home world. Think about your workspace, remove distractions. I actually had my cat walk across my computer yesterday and actually hang up on a Zoom call. Fortunately, it was with my daughter, not a business one. But think about making sure that you've got your office space ready to go and set up appropriately. Make eye contact. Pay attention to your body language and how you're looking. Again, eye contact, but also facial expressions and your body position, but notice the other person's as well. Think about your tone of voice and your phrasing. Again, there may be blips in the communication, allow for breaks and pauses so the other person can chime in. Remember that sometimes there's a delay with Zoom or Skype or other technology problems. Share documents to help support your cause or your case. Things that you think the other person would want to see or would help them understand what you're trying to suggest. And then recap at the end of the meeting what the agreement is. And those are just some tips to add to this to remember in the virtual world. So here we are at the end of my presentation. I'm recapping the 4 steps in this process: setting a clear goal, assessing the situation, picking the right strategy, and planning your approach and practicing. Well, then earlier in this presentation, I asked you to think about an influence situation that you might be facing currently or in the near future. What's something that you have learned either from the key principles that we reviewed or this brief review of this 5-step approach that you can apply in that situation? Go ahead and jot some thoughts down in the chat box. And somebody, Midori asked, Is listening a skill that can apply across the board? Yes, absolutely. Listening is really helpful regardless. You want to be listening to learn and as that quote said, get more information from them. You're definitely going to be doing more questioning and listening when you're in the hard approach, but listening is always going to be useful in any approach. Carol's training to be a contact tracer. All of this is helpful. Good. That's great. Others, how can you use this? What's one thing you want to take away, the biggest takeaway for you from what we've talked about in this last bit? Role play and practice. It's great. What's the role of the experts? Well, and again, you know, if you come across as an expert and that seems off-putting, pay attention to that. How can you create space to share the information and get feedback and allow for questions? If you think that that expert approach is creating that negative pushback, notice that, adjust your approach, share your insight and information, but also allow for space for others to share theirs. What do you think about what I shared? What do you know about it? How do you think that would work? That's where questions might help you be more expert without creating any kind of negative pushback. Personality types different from your own. Good. Oh yes, with a group of people, absolutely. The team approach is great with the spirit, but if you're trying to influence a group of people and try to get them to support an idea you have, you might want to approach them one-on-one. That's where I do use a stakeholder analysis tool with my clients and help them think about who are all those people, what might be important to them, how much of their support is critical to the success of your idea, and what do you think their response is going to be? Are they going to be supportive? Are they going to be negative? And how do you approach them based on that? So absolutely, these influence techniques can work both with a team as a whole. But again, if you're going to go with facts, not everybody in the room is going to be interested in the same facts. So you might want to approach them previously about specific information that you think is going to matter to them. I learned that when I was on the school board. Certain staff would meet with us individually, the 7 school board members, and talk about certain pieces of information that they knew would be most important to us, so that we go into the meeting more open-minded rather than immediately have the wall up going, well, wait, that's going to cost too much, or oh, wait, that's going to affect the thing that matters to me. So again, you can use it with groups. Let's see. The rest comes naturally. I hope so. It's certainly something I keep working on. What's important to other people? Good. I'm on a grow the business team at my business, and I've been approaching the group as a whole. I realize I need to influence them one at a time. Good. Thinking about what not to do and not to say. Maybe at exit strategy. Good. Goal setting, active listening. Oh, did my husband ever clean the garage? Yes, he did. Because it was such a funny moment that we had that funny exchange. He realized I was going overboard trying to influence him with all these different approaches and strategies. So yes, thankfully he cleaned the garage and I helped him. So, all right. Oh, suggestions on how to work in a story and make it seem natural. You know, allude to a movie that you just saw, or a book you just read, or a quote from, you know, a famous president, or, you know, think about it ahead of time. What kind of story might connect, and what you like. If you know the other person you're talking to just read a book or about Theodore Roosevelt, well, maybe find a quote from Theodore Roosevelt or something like that. Again, you can kind of work the story in. I've worked a few into just my presentation today, and you can see how I did that. Just find a way that it resonates with you personally and share it from there, or think about how it might resonate with something you know that they're either doing or have done. Let's see. How do you know what matters to the other person? Well, that's a good question. Actually, what do you think? How do we know what matters to the other person? What can we do? I'll ask the group. Wise mind that we are. How can we find out? Ask them. Right, ask them, or if you know others who've worked with them on similar things before, you can check in with them and say, hey, what's your experience been when you've talked to Veronica about this? But you could also just come to me and have more of an open conversation about the topic before you come in with your idea. Sort of feel it out just a little bit. Ask them, do a little research. Well,
Veronica, that was wonderful. I learned a lot. That's a subject near and dear to my heart. So thank you very much for doing this. And you had a great turnout today. And again, we will send out the PowerPoint, and there's a handout that Veronica's going to make available, and we'll have a recording of the video.
And I just want to reiterate, I'm going to be sending a tool. Dave is going to send it out. It's a giveaway that it's basically a structure to help you remember to use the 5 steps and to highlight some of the things that you might forget to do. So feel free to use that. Email me if you have questions about that. I have many other tools that I use to help my clients with influence, to help myself with influence. So if you have questions or want to know more, please don't hesitate to email me at my email address.